Thank you very much. Well, we're talking about the educational program that is very important to all Australians. I can understand what Senator Bernardi is saying about the funding, and One Nation has been having extensive talks with not only the government, with actually interested groups, Catholic schools education, parents, Labor. We've sat down to try and find some common sense in where we're headed with this. We will be supporting the government bill on this, but I do have a few things to say about it. Under the Labor Party, and they've actually been talking about, there's a cut to this bill of $22 billion. My understanding, it's a lie. There's not a cut to $22 billion. It's like the Labor have gone out there and promised and said we're going to be putting an extra $30 billion into the educational funding. Now the Liberal Party, the government, is bringing it back to $18.6 billion. So therefore, Australians have lost $22 billion. Now, you can have your wish list. You can go out there and say we're going to give you this money, but unless it's actually there on black and white in paper, I can go out and wish you and say I'm going to give you $1,000, but I've only got $500 to give. So unless you produce it, don't go out there and telling lies to the public, because that's exactly what they're doing now. They're out there doing these robo-calls around Queensland to people and saying, we are, with all the coal miners and workers there, we are actually this is the CFMEU. We're actually ringing you to tell you that Pauline Hanson's One Nation is supporting the Liberal Party, and they're going to cut $22 billion out of the government funding. So this is a real cost-cutting to you. So she's destroying the educational funding. Well, this is another lie. This is basically like the Medicare scare the Labor did. You lie to people, you're not upfront with people, you're hypocrites. And so anyway, I'd suggest that if you've got to pull these dirty tactics and stunts on people to get back the votes in Queensland, if you were honest with people, upfront with people, you might do a better job than what you're doing now. But the people are waking up to you. What my concern about this is, why do we need more $18.2 billion, another thrown at this, when the federal funding for education now is just under $88 billion. On top of that, you've got state funding that goes into it, and then again you've got parents that pay their fees to send the kids to schools. When I went to school, we didn't have all this money thrown at us. Our educational levels are dropping. Australians used to be very, very high on the list of our educational standards in Australia. Now we are dropping. People say it's a lack of money. Let's throw more money at it. Throwing money at it is not always the answer, and I don't believe it is the answer now. We have lost control over our classrooms, but I think the main issue here is we've lost the quality of teachers. Because people over the years, these do-gooders, who want everyone to feel good about themselves, they've come into the educational system and they're saying to kids, you're all right, you don't have to compete. You don't have to compete in the classroom. You don't have to have your grades. You don't have to perform to get top of the class, so we're going to take grading away. We're not going to tell your parents whether you got a 40% or whether you got an 85%. So we won't tell them that. We want you to feel good about yourselves. So you're not competing. Well, I'm telling you, that's what the real shock in our society is, because the kids are not competing in the classrooms. They're not competing when they get out of the classrooms either, because when they get out in the real world and start working in the workforce, there's no competition, and life is about a competition. It's about striving to do the best that you can. And unless you know what standard you're at, how do you know how much further you have to strive? So I think that in the classroom, and I've spoken to the Educational Minister about this, that things need to change. It's not about throwing more money at it. It's how we actually can improve our educational standards. It is absolutely pathetic when I see the way that children write, or they can't write. we used to have a decent standard of writing. It was called running writing. Now, kids are flat out even knowing how to write, let alone doing maths. And maths is not a prerequisite that you have to learn it in every class. They cut out maths, so you don't necessarily in some schools have to learn maths or science, and even English. They are the basics that we need in our education for the rest of our life. And as Senator Bernardi said, kids can't add up. How right that is. I had my shop. Oh, we had the till there, and then when the till would tell you what change you gave, but when we had blackouts, the young staff didn't even know how to count money out unless the till told them how to do it. They can't calculate, they can't work out anything in their life because they don't have the maths, they're not taught. We're relying everything on computers, on calculators, and in real life that's not always at your fingertips to use. I think that we need to go back to the basics. In the classroom, there's lack of discipline. The teachers are told they can't discipline the kids. And then our educational system is now teaching the kids their rights. And then they say your parents can't tell you what to do because you have your rights. And then when they go home, the parents tell them something, and then the kids say, you can't tell me that, I know my rights. Parents have a right, and this is what the problem is in our educational system, that kids need to actually know that if they do the wrong thing, they must be disciplined. And the teacher should have control over their classrooms. And a lot of teachers want that. We've got to, and of course, the push for safe schools. Most parents that I talk to, they don't want that. They think it's a load of rubbish, and they don't want their kids to be confronted with this. And yes, it has been forced on them in some schools, onto the kids. This whole package, I hope that it does work for our kids, for our educational system, and it will be brought before the board, and I will continue to talk to the Education Minister with regards to bringing in maths and science and English and the quality of our teachers, and stop pushing them through an educational system. And especially also what we need to stop is this attitude that everyone must go on to university. No, they don't. You have kids that are not academically minded who would be better on the tools or in a trade. Why don't we push that? Why don't we give them a better understanding so businesses can go to the classrooms and say to them, this is what it's like to be a plumber, this is what it's like to be an electrician, this is what it's like if you want to go into the IT profession or do something other, rather than saying, peer pressure, you must go from here on to university. And at the end of the day, there's no really qualifying levels that you need to get into university. So we've got this peer pressure that everyone feels they've got to go to university, a cost to the taxpayer, they will never pass. It's not like, I've been to university, which one did you go to? Without the standard of education. Let's give kids the opportunity to choose other professions. Let them leave at year 10 if they're not academically minded, instead of keeping them in the educational system just to bolster the figures so they're not on Newstart or youth allowance, so they're not on the unemployment queues, but give them the opportunities to go on to do other trades. And then I'll lead to our TAFE colleges. TAFEs have been shut down. They're not getting the funding. That is so important to a lot of the youth who don't want to go on to further education in our universities. That needs to be funded, that needs to be looked after. And I will be supporting that, and the government will look at that to actually the TAFE colleges. I know they've been under a lot of pressure. But to you, Mr Acting Deputy President, the educational system, yes, there has been concerns about this from the Catholic schooling. They take up a lot of the slack. It's not only the Catholic schooling, but it's other non-government educational centres. And they are trying to do their best to educate a lot of Australians right across the country. There's been talk who's getting money and who's losing the money, where's the funding coming from. The government is going to give non-government schools 80% of this funding. They don't get state funding, and the state schools will be getting 20% of the funding. Now, on average, a child who is actually at primary school will get just over $10,000, and at a high school, approximately about $13,000 funding. This package is going to give an increase of just over 3%, approximately around about 3.7% funding per child, extra funding. By not introducing this immediately, and it's going to be assessed by the schools, and the government has, and thanks to Senator Back, and he's raised some issues here which he spoke to us about, that the government needs to really look at, is this funding going to have an impact on some of these schools, especially those in lower social and economic areas? Is it going to have an impact on them, and will they close? That concerns me greatly, and I'm pleased to hear that they're actually going to bring in place that will be reviewed in a year's time. And I think that's very important, so it'll give it time to actually settle in and see that it is working. Senator Bernardi talks about, he doesn't want to take it over the 10 years. Well, my concern is, I think that schools and everyone need to know the future, what is happening. They plan further ahead than that. And if you only do it at 4 years, then my concern is if Labor gets in at the next election, it will blow completely out of proportion. They'll make all these wishes, throw more billions of dollars at it without really dealing with the real problem, because there will be money spent at this that we will not have. So I'd hate to think what Labor will be throwing at this funding for the schools, because we cannot afford it. Like I said, it has been a real issue for One Nation to come to a decision whether to support this at an extra $18.6 billion to the Australian taxpayers. But I hope that this will improve our educational standards if it is addressed in the classroom, and I think that's what's very important about it. Another thing that we need to address here also is, and I'll go back to the classrooms again. I hear so many times from parents and teachers whose time is taken up with children in the classroom, whether they have a disability or whether they are autistic, that it is taking up the teacher's time. These kids have a right to an education by all means, but if there is a number of them, these children should actually go into a special classroom, looked after and given that special attention, because most of the time the teacher spends so much time on them, they forget about the child who is reigning at the, wants to go ahead and leaps and bounds in their education, but are held back by those because the teachers spend time with them. And I'm not denying them. If it was one of my children, I'd love all the time given to them, to give them those opportunities. But is it at the loss of our other kids? I think that we have more autistic children, and yet we are not providing the special classrooms or the schools for these autistic children, and if they are, they're at a huge expense to parents. I think we need to take that into consideration, that we need to look at this. It's no good saying that we've got to allow these kids to feel good about themselves and we don't want to upset them and make them feel hurt, and I understand that. But we have to be realistic at times and consider the impact that is having on other children in that classroom. We can't afford to hold our kids back. We have the rest of the world and other kids in other countries who are going ahead leaps and bounds ahead of us. And unless we keep up a decent educational standard in this country, we will keep going further backwards and backwards. And our kids will not be the ones that are getting the good jobs in this country. They will be bringing in people from overseas, filling positions in this country that belong to our children. So our education is very important, and I just feel that it needs to be handled correctly, and we need to get rid of these people because you want everyone to feel good about themselves. Let's get some common sense back into our classrooms and what we do. Like I said, One Nation has spoken to many areas. have I got it right? I hope we have got it right, because it's very important. You know, I see so much in this place. It's the blame game, and you know, Labor opposes so much all the time just because they're in opposition. It's a pity that this place doesn't sit down and really have clear discussions with each other and find what is best for the people, because they're sick and tired of this. Labor, you have said that you wanted to throw money at it. Well, I think it's a good start, the $18.6 billion. That is a start. Why can't you work with the government with regards to this and then build on that? And if this money is not going to the place where it's supposed to, and it does need more funding, then work together to increase the funding. Stop opposing things just because the fact is you're on the opposition. It's about working together for the future of this nation. And you know, I just get so frustrated with the whole lot here, because I know people want the right answers. Not everyone, and I've heard it from those who are Liberal voters, are not entirely happy with this package at all. So whether they're not hearing the right message or not, like I said, it's a tough decision to make what is right, but at least I think it's a step in the right direction, and that's what we are trying to do. One Nation is trying to handle this in a way that we're trying to give assistance to all those parents and schools, and extra funding with regards to the educational policy. So anyway, that's One Nation's stance on it. We will be supporting the government in this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Senator McKenzie.